Hi, this is Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation Podcast. This podcast isn't some magic trick about how to work less. Instead, it's about how to really enjoy the work that you do and to enjoy your vacation time. Hi, it's Sean, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation. What is this life so full of care? We have no time to stand and stare. No time to stand beneath the boughs and stare as long as sheep or cows. No time to see when woods we pass where squirrels hide their nuts and grass. Wouldn't it be a bit of a shame if we had no time to look at sheep and cows because we're not being paid on time? There isn't a foolproof system to get paid every time, but if you pay attention to how other industries work, you might never have to chase payments again. And this is what this podcast is about. It's about 3 core methods that have been used both by us and by other industries to get paid on time. To avoid that rigmarole of chasing after the client and calling them and invoicing them and calling them and invoicing them. So what are the 3 methods that we're going to cover in this podcast? The first is the construction company, which is the slab method. The second is the 100% payment in advance method. And the third is a down payment, and this could be around 50%. Let's look at all the 3 methods. They might be reasonably familiar to you, but there might be something that will help you somewhere down the line. Let's start out with the first method, which is the construction company method or the slab method. About 6 or 7 or 8 years ago, we decided to build a house next door to our own place. And we had a sizable plot, and so we decided to build this house. And when we got the builders in, they followed this slab system of payment. So every stage of the construction had a prepayment attached, and it looked a bit like this. Foundation, prepayment 1, rough framing, prepayment 2, rough plumbing and electrical payment 3. On it went through the insulation, interior, exterior, carpeting, and all the driveways. If we wanted the next stage to proceed, we needed to make the payment to keep our builders motivated. This slab system of payment is one of the finest, both for the client and the person doing the job. It makes sure that both parties are incredibly motivated to go ahead with the process. As a service provider, this is often an excellent system to follow because it ensures that both parties move ahead systematically. However, there's also a bit of a downside. If one of the parties decides to walk away, there's trouble. Let's say you start working on a client's website and the payments are going really well, and then the client runs into some sort of difficulty. Maybe she's had a personal problem, or maybe she can't pay the rest of the sum, or it might be just that she's very slow with sending her text and the images across. No matter what the problem, you're stuck because you can't proceed with the job. The happy news is that if you worked out your payment structure well, you will not run into a loss because you've covered what you've done. Let's say the website or the copywriting project or the consulting project. It had all of these stages and, well, you only got paid for 2 of those stages, but that's all the work you did, which is good. So you got paid for the work that you did, which is not always the case. And there's another thing, and that is, it depends on how much work has to be put in. So let's say you're building a website. Maybe you've got to put in a lot of work at the start, and then there's not so much in the middle and towards the end. Well, you're going to have to bill accordingly. It's not like we're suggesting that the slabs have to be equal. It doesn't have to be 20%, then 20%, then 20%. It can just be 45% of the work at the start, and then the client gets going from there, and then you have the slabs roll out one by one. This is going to take some groundwork and estimation in advance, and things might go wrong, but you get better as you go about it. This is one of the systems that works really well if you're a service provider. And the reason for that is it's so straightforward. It's straightforward in the way that I can see as a person buying it that I'm only going to pay for this section and then that section and the next section. And you, on the other hand, also are not out of pocket because you're being paid for the work that you're doing. Most people don't consider this. They don't consider, hey, wait a second, let me just break this up into 5 slabs or 8 slabs or whatever, and then go ahead and get the client to pay accordingly. They just wait and wait and wait, and that's where the problem lies. So this is the first system, and I think if you're starting out, this is probably one of the finest systems to have, where you have this slab by slab by slab system. However, there is also a superior system, and this takes us to the second one, which is you get 100% of the payment in advance. My father ran a secretarial college for over 25 years. And it wasn't an easy life. He'd leave for work before 7 a.m. And this is because he had to make sure that he opened all the windows, all the doors, he turned on all the lights. And he had to have his first cup of masala chai before the students arrived. All day long he'd be at work, and then he'd return home at 8:30 at night. It was a time-consuming job, but the one thing that he didn't spend time on was collecting money. What he'd do is always get the students' money in advance. If you wanted to be on a course, you wanted to learn a skill such as typing, you had to pay him before you got started. Now, he was lucky because he was in an industry which allows for this. This system of payment is incredibly common in schools, in colleges, universities. You know how it works. You pay all the money in advance. It's also common for things like electronics, petrol, stuff that you're buying all the time. You pay in advance. But will it work for you as a business? Well, it really depends on 2 factors. It depends on your confidence. That's the first factor. And the second is the demand for your product or service. And let's take an example of a restaurant. When you look at a restaurant, what do? You get in, you sit there, you eat your meal, you have your drinks, and then you pay when you finish with your meal. But that's not the case with David Patterson. David Patterson runs the San Francisco restaurant called Koi. When you make a reservation at Koi, you have to give your credit card details. And if you decide to cancel 48 hours in advance, you won't be charged. But if you tip over in the last 48 hours, your credit card is charged. If you book the table for 6 people, that's 6 into $275 per head. And that's just the tasting menu. And then there is also a 20% service charge. Will you be charged the service charge if you don't show up? It's not clear. But what's more than clear is that they're treating all sales as final, just like a sporting event or a concert. And if you think that they're alone, they're not. Lazy Bear is another San Francisco restaurant, and it does this sales all at once. You know, they'll put all the tickets all at once, and it's usually on a Wednesday in the middle of the month. And they'll announce these ticket sales via Twitter and send an email to their mailing list. And like Koi, there's no refund. You can't be switched to a different date or a different time, but you can get another person to go in your place. So the list of restaurants that have this philosophy or this policy is growing. In short, what's happening here is that in an industry where you paid much later, it's now being brought to payment in advance. This is long before you've had your main, long before you've finished your last espresso in Porto. You have to pay in advance. We've kind of used the same system at Psychotactics. We take almost all our payments in advance. So if you buy any book, any course, any workshop, you have to pay in advance. Even if it's consulting, you pay in advance. In several cases, the payment is made by the client several months in advance. Take the article writing course, for instance. The course started in August this year, but the clients paid about 5 months in advance. The sales page workshop, which is an on-site workshop, That was also sold in advance, 4 or 5 months in advance. And you may wonder if this is linked with the demand for psychotactics workshops and courses. And to some extent, yes, it's because the courses, workshops, and self-study products, they're all sold out very quickly. There is this demand factor in place, but there's also a second point. And this second point is confidence. At Psychotactics, we always confidently charge in advance. Even when you go back to the earliest days of consulting, we charge in advance. We might not have been 100% confident that the client would be so cooperative, because clients don't always want to pay 100% in advance. But we'd ask anyway, and this is important. You have to ask anyway. The client is there in front of you, you ask anyway. Sometimes you do a little back and forth discussion, but once we removed that risk, once we had testimonials, once we had referrals, once we had that system going, there was a very good chance that they'd pay 100% in advance. Selling products online, we had no choice but to charge in advance. But with every sale, what we got is this confidence. And this is the confidence that you need to have. You need to ask for it. And it takes a bit of bravado, because there you are offline, you're standing in front of the client or you're speaking to them on the phone, and you're thinking, well, they might not be so happy. But I don't think it's a question of happiness. It's a question of how much confidence you push forward, how much enthusiasm you have. You bite your lower lip and you whistle a happy tune, and there is a pretty good chance that you will get 100% in advance. You might hear the sound of butterflies whooshing through your tummy, but ask anyway, and you'll be surprised at how many clients will give in if you just ask. The point of asking is that it puts you in a great position. Even if you don't get paid 100% in advance, you might get 50 or 60 or even 75% in advance. So what it does is it sets up this bargaining situation where you go from this, oh, this is this big chunk, to a smaller chunk, or maybe even halfway, but now you're still not starting from the halfway point and then moving downwards. You're starting from the 100% and moving to 75% or 50%. So these are the two methods. The first is to make sure that you go through the slab system, which is the most equitable system. And the second method is to ask for 100% in advance and then move down if you need to. The third one is to ask for a part payment, and usually this should be around 50%. This takes us to the third section in our podcast, which is the 50% payment. Is there a big advantage in getting only 50% in advance? It might sound pretty negative when you've listened to, hey, get 100% advance, get 65% advance. But there's also a big advantage in getting only 50% in advance. The thing is that when you get paid everything, you kind of lose motivation for doing the job. Not everyone does, and you have to train yourself. But I remember clearly getting all the money in the bank, and then the job becomes this thing you have to do even though you've been paid. And it's quite hard getting yourself motivated when everything has already been put in the bank, and it's like money that you already have. No one's going to take away that money. Well, at least that's what you think. That's the kind of danger that you have when you have all that money paid in advance. The slab system works fine. The 50% system also works fine. And that's why sometimes, at least at the start, it might be a good idea to have this 50% system in place. That 50% system motivates you. It also motivates the client, because now they have a stake in the whole process. They're not just shooting the breeze. They know that they put their money down, and so they know they have to do their part as well. This doesn't mean that your clients are going to get very cooperative all of a sudden. You're still going to run into clients that delay the project, but this confusion can be reduced if you have clear instructions, you have clear deadlines, for the client and for yourself. Either way, what you've got in front of you are these three systems of payment, these three methods to get paid in advance. And what you finally do depends on your level of confidence. It depends on the demand for your product, the demand for your service. Now, this makes it sound like it's terrible to get paid later. And it's not the case. It all depends on how the client pays. When I moved to New Zealand, I stepped away from a system which was very frustrating. I lived in India and I didn't set up the right expectation with clients. As a result, I'd spend over 30% of my time just chasing payments, and it was very frustrating. At one point, I was so upset with the backlog of payments that I had to see a doctor because I had high blood pressure from all the hassle of not being paid. It wasn't like we needed the money. It was just like, I did this job, I'm entitled to this, and you don't sleep at night, and it's very frustrating. And imagine now that you actually need that money, and then it becomes even more of a pressure on you. But of course, there's the flip side. You have clients who pay on time. There are clients who don't give you any trouble. And if that's the case, then this entire article, this entire podcast is just advice for something in the future. It's not of any value to you right now. However, if you are struggling or will struggle with payments, then you might want to set up these systems, one of these systems, because they all work remarkably well. You might still end up having a life of care, and you might not have that much time to stand and stare. But at least it won't be because you're chasing up payments. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. What are the three things that we covered? We covered the slab system of payment that is based on 20%, 30%, 15%, 20%. It doesn't have to be all equal. It could be depending on the amount of work that's being done. And it could start with 65% or it could start with 35%. That slab system is very useful because you get paid for what you've done and you don't run out of pocket. It might be still very frustrating not to finish the job because you're counting on that money, but at least you're not 100% out of pocket. So that's the first system. The second system is the 100% in advance. And the 100% in advance depends on a couple of things. And the first thing is just your demand factor. We create a demand for our products and services. We make them scarce. We have very few courses. We have them very infrequently. And also with the home study versions, we only offer 35 copies. So what we're doing is we are creating scarcity and we're creating urgency, and that causes demand. Admittedly, we didn't have that on our website from the very start because we didn't have the confidence. And that confidence, you can't really build up the confidence. You just have to be a little, just say it and see what happens. Tell the client that your terms are usually 100% in advance. But remember, if you say usually, that means you're not 100% in advance. So you have to be very careful with your language. But the chances are you can start with 100% and then say, okay, fine, we can negotiate to 70% in advance. The point is that you're not starting at 50% and then working your way down, and that's a good thing. And finally, that brings us to the 50%, which is what a lot of clients will agree to. A lot of the clients that I worked with, even when I was a complete beginner, were more than happy to pay that 50% in advance. And it would have saved me a lot of grief if I just insisted and put it on paper. And this is very important. We didn't cover this earlier, but putting stuff on paper just changes people's perceptions. I don't know why, but if you say it to them, it's different than these are our terms and the terms and conditions are on paper. There is something about paper that causes people to go, oh, it's on paper, it must be true, we might have to do this thing. And so put it on paper and at least get the 50%. And if you can't, then go through the slabs or the 100%, which is the best of all. But what is the one thing that you can do today? I think if you can work out the slab system, and it might be different, like for instance, if you're a web designer, then every website's going to have different parameters and different requirements. But if you can sit down and just work out that slab system, I think you will find that it's the best system to get started. And then once you're in demand, well, you could ask for 100% in advance and you're more than likely to get it. So start off with that slab system, and I think you'll be quite pleased with where it goes. And this brings us to the end of this podcast. So what's happening in Psychotactics land? By the time you listen to this podcast, I should be in Australia. I'm speaking at We Are Podcast, or the Amplify event, and this is in Brisbane. And this time I'm not talking about pricing or marketing, but I'm talking about a topic that is very dear to me and has been that way for many years, and it's called talent. I intended to write something about it in 2008, and then the years kept passing by and I keep threatening to write it. But in the last few months, it has gone through a real metamorphosis at a very high speed too. And we were going to call it the talent equation. And then last week we were walking for a coffee and we go, no, this talent equation, there's already a podcast, there's already a website on that. And so we changed it to the talent model because that's what it is like. It's a model, people get the wrong idea about talent. And we were nice and happy about it. And Renuka said, go ahead and register the domain name, but I didn't. And I don't know why. It wasn't some smart decision. It was just something like, I won't do that right now. Anyway, I finished my presentation, which is for Australia, and I sent a very quick summary of the presentation to a couple of clients, and Simon Lamy took a look at it. And he said, what I really liked was that slide where you said, suddenly talented. And he said, that's so cool. And it was that moment that I realized, oh, wait, this is the product. This is the book. This is the whole thing. We now have suddenlytalented.com. Don't go there. There's nothing there, but Suddenly Talented. And that's really what's happening in Psychotactics land. We're doing all of this planning for when we're away in Houston, and we're doing all the podcasts and everything. But this moment was so special because it suddenly fits just right. There is this feeling of just right, of Suddenly Talented. And you'll hear more of it as we go about creating a book, a series. I don't know what it is, but we'll hear more about it as we go along. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about was this concept of testimonials. Now, in this podcast, we talked about how to get paid in advance. And there are systems, but sometimes those systems don't necessarily work, in which case it's better to get great clients in the first instance. And what I've found is that testimonials on your website, testimonials that you have in your booklet, brochure, wherever, they are crucial to attracting clients because the testimonial becomes like a mirror. You attract good clients or attract bad clients or attract greedy clients based on the testimonials and the photographs of the testimonials that you have. And that's why I would recommend that you at least look at The Secret Life of Testimonials. Because I think you will find that a lot changes once you change your testimonials. In these last 18 years that we've been at Psychotactics, one of the greatest secret devices or secret weapons that we've had is the testimonial. And I'm very passionate about this concept of the testimonial because, what's a testimonial? It's nothing. It's what clients say about you. But there's 100 pages or more on this one topic. It goes into a lot of detail, and I think you will enjoy it. So go check out The Secret Life of Testimonials. It's not a very expensive book. It's on the website. And that's pretty much it from Psychotactics land. I'll say bye for now. See you in 5000 BC. Bye-bye. Still listening? One of the things that is interesting is the stuff that we put out on a regular basis. Stuff that I say on a podcast or maybe in the forum or in 5000 BC. And Renuka and I were having this discussion. It's got nothing to do with testimonials or payments or anything. It's just the stuff that you say and then the way people interpret that information. So in one of the earlier podcasts, I said, I've been spending a lot of time on the article writing course. And Renuka said, well, a client might read it the wrong way. They might say, well, then you're not spending so much time in 5000 BC, or if I send you an email, you won't respond to it. And that's not true. I mean, yes, there are people who would do that, but we are really interested in what we do. And it might take 2 days instead of 2 hours, but you will get that response and you will get a detailed response. So there is a bit of a time delay. The point that I'm trying to make here is that you might think, what if the client misinterprets what I'm going to say, so I'm going to control what I'm going to say? And you don't have to do that. People will misinterpret anything that you're going to say, and what you have to be is just be yourself. That's the little bit that I wanted to add today because you were still listening. Thanks again, and we'll see you in 5000 BC. Bye-bye.